Hi, good evening. Welcome to the American Jewish Historical Society. I'm Gemma Birnbaum, the Executive Director. We are honored to be hosting this event, Reflections on the Achille Lauro Hijacking, 40 Years of Activism and Resistance, in partnership with the ADL and in honor of people I am so proud to call my friends, Ilsa and Lisa Klinghoffer. We are so pleased to welcome the Klinghoffer family, who have entrusted AJHS to steward their family papers and artifacts. Some of these items connected to Leon Klinghoffer's life, as well as the hijacking, are on view in the Great Hall where you came in, and we hope you'll take a moment to engage with these meaningful materials. I'd like to take a moment to thank our panelists, representatives from ADL Steve Scheinberg, Steve Freeman, and Rachel Grinspan, and our AJHS trustee, Julie Solomon. After the discussion, we hope you'll join us for a reception and book signing in the Great Hall, and I'd like to invite my colleague and friend, Steve Scheinberg from the ADL, to say a few words.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Scheinberg, and I am the Chief Legacy Officer of the Anti-Defamation League, a position that's just created and is designed to preserve, protect, and activate the legacy of the Anti-Defamation League in all of its work. In other words, it is the same commitment to history and the past that AJHS, our partner, shares. So I'm delighted to be able to be here and say a few words to you. And I'm more than proud to stand here and welcome Lisa and Ilsa Klinghoffer, friends, colleagues, and people who, in a chaotic world, when they're standing with you, you know you're doing something right. So I thank Lisa and Ilsa for that moral clarity, that moral guidance that they provide us every single day. And I thank them for all that they've done throughout the years for the Anti-Defamation League, standing with us, supporting our programs, particularly for law enforcement, and of course with the Marilyn and Leon Klinghoffer Foundation. So I am forever grateful to have the opportunity to meet and work with and now celebrate and preserve the legacy that Lisa and Ilsa represent, and of course to honor their departed and dear family, Marilyn and Leon. So thank you all. Thank you for being here, and let me have the privilege and the honor of welcoming Lisa and Ilsa to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the American Jewish Historical Society. I'm Lisa, and this is my sister, Ilsa. Ilsa and I thank you all for coming. We would especially like to thank Gemma Birnbaum, Executive Director of the American Jewish Historical Society, home of the Klinghoffer Archives, and our family of the Anti-Defamation League, for all your efforts in making this special evening. 40 years ago, our father, Leon Klinghoffer, was murdered by Palestinian terrorists who hijacked the Achille Lauro cruise ship on which Leon was celebrating his 36th wedding anniversary with a Mediterranean cruise with his beloved wife, Marilyn. His murder was one of the first acts of terrorism committed against an American citizen simply because he was Jewish and he was an American. His murder resonated with the American public and indeed the world because our father was disabled and in a wheelchair. He was not a threat. His murder was a chilling precursor of things to come. Within 24 hours after the crisis ended, we received a call from our mother that began with the words that have shaped our lives ever since. She said, girls, your father was a hero. Do your crying now, because I've done mine, and when I come home, we have a lot of work to do.
And in that moment of unimaginable grief, our mother gave us a purpose. She said this was not only a loss for our family and the Jewish people, but also for all people who believe in the right to live free from terror. For the past 4 decades, my sister and I have tried to honor our parents' legacy and our mother's mission by working to ensure our father's death was not in vain. Among the myriad of initiatives we have pursued with the ADL, the most well-known have been the establishment of the Klinghoffer Foundation to combat terrorism, the founding of the Klinghoffer Award, given to recognize noteworthy efforts to combat terrorism, and also through regular participation in ADL's Advanced Training School of Extremist and Terrorist Threats for Law Enforcement. Our mother was ahead of her time when she made the decision to hold those who perpetrated our father's murder accountable. Shortly after our mother returned from Italy, and right after our father's Shiva ended, she said to us, "I'm going to sue the PLO. I have to do this for your father. You're either with me or you're not." During the 4 short months our mother lived after the hijacking, she had her attorney file a lawsuit in federal court and fearlessly moved forward despite personal threats to her and to our family. Nothing would stop her, despite the fact there were no laws on the books that would allow her to sue a foreign entity for international act of terrorism on an American citizen, and the fact she was fighting a battle with cancer. 10 years later, in 1996, the lawsuit was settled. While the lawsuit was moving forward, my sister and I worked with the ADL to lobby Congress to press for strong anti-terrorism laws. Political will and public sentiment was with us, and in late 1992, the Anti-Terrorism Act was introduced into Congress. One of its most important provisions allowed U.S. citizens to sue foreign entities for international acts of terrorism against Americans. On April 24, 1996, a later version of the act was signed into law by President Clinton. It was a thrill for us at the White House to be there with President Clinton and Vice President Al Gore when the president signed the bill.
The passage of the anti-terrorism bill was foundational to what was yet to come. My sister and I continue to support the work where we can to further our mother's mission to educate the world about terrorism. This evening, you will hear more from Julie Solomon, noted New York Times author of An Innocent Bystander, The Killing of Leon Klinghoffer, from Rachel Grinspan, Associate General Counsel from the ADL. They will speak about the various anti-terrorism laws that have been enacted and the ability of our justice system to hold bad actors accountable for their deeds. You'll learn just how far we've come and what the future is for individual and state sponsors of terrorism. We are profoundly grateful to the Anti-Defamation League and to the American Jewish Historical Society for giving us the structure and support to carry forward this mission. And today, as we gather to mark the 40th year anniversary of the hijacking of the Achille Lauro and the murder of our father, we'd like to acknowledge and thank the following people who are with us here tonight and have stood by our side for the past 40 years. Please stand when I mention your name. Jennifer Levy, former trial attorney in the Counterterrorism Section of the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. Heather Cartwright, former director of the Office of Justice for Victims of Overseas Terrorism Division of the Department of Justice, Boyd Johnson, former Deputy U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of New York, and Brendan McGuire, former prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney Office for the Southern District of New York.
We would also like to acknowledge and thank the following people: Catherine Turman, former director of the Office of Victims Assistance for the FBI, who was unable to be here today. And from the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO and National Director. Ken Jacobson, Deputy National Director. Stephen Scheinberg, Chief Legal Officer. Steve Freeman, Senior Counsel, Director of Legacy. Susan Heller-Pinto, Vice President of International Policy. And even though he's not here today, Abe Foxman, the former National Director of the ADL, with whom we began this journey 40 years ago. Thank you to all of you that I just mentioned. And of course, we want to thank our families who have stood with us through all of these years with unwavering support. We love you so much. And finally, last but not least, we want to thank all of you that are here this evening for keeping alive the memory of our father and acknowledging the incredible, extraordinary courage of our mother, who taught us in the face of hate and violence, grief must be transformed into action. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here this evening. My name is Steve Freeman. I am Senior Counsel and Director of Legacy at ADL, and it's a real privilege for me to moderate the program that's going to follow now. I have to start by saying thank you to our hosts, the American Jewish Historical Society, with whom ADL has been building a very wonderful and important relationship, helping us to preserve our history and also to tell the stories, preserve the rich stories that are there. And also a personal note to Lisa and Ilse and the Klinghoffer family. I've known them ever since pretty much the tragedy itself. I actually was the person, the young lawyer at the time that Abe Foxman sent to represent ADL at the Shiva for Leon. I was there. I actually got to meet the family then. I even met Marilyn, which was an honor. And so this is very personal for me, just to be here with them and their families. Excuse me. And we've been friends for 40 years. We've shared important family events with each other, and it's been really a joy. I'm sorry the circumstances that we met, but it has been a joy to get to know you and to work with you, and it's always a pleasure to spend time together. And so thank you, and thank you all for what you heard Lisa and Ilse speak so eloquently. That is sort of very authentic Lisa and Ilse. I've heard them do it many times, and it always gets me every time. So, whoops, sorry. Before we move on, before I introduce the panel, let's actually pause and take a moment of silence in memory of Leon and all the innocent victims of terrorism over the past 4 decades. Thank you. So now I have the honor of introducing this very distinguished panel. What we're going to do after I introduce the panelists, each of them is going to take a few minutes to share their particular perspective on the significance of the Achille Lauro, the story from Julie Solomon. I'm going to introduce them in a minute. From Julie Solomon, who wrote the book on the Achille Lauro hijacking. My colleague Rachel Greenspan, who is going to talk about litigating against terrorists and how ADL is now much more engaged in that even than we have ever been. But it all started with the Klinghoffer DPLO case 40 years ago. So let me now, and after they each speak for a few minutes, we'll have a brief discussion up here, and then we're going to have time for Q&A. And I believe folks from HHS will be walking around with index cards. If you have a question, just please write it down, and they will bring them up to me, and we'll try and get in as many questions as we have time for. So now it's my pleasure to introduce this amazing panel. I'm going to start with Julie Salomon. Julie is the New York Times best-selling author of 12 books for adults and children, including her 2011 biography of playwright Wendy Wasserstein, Wendy and the Lost Boys. Her books include The Devil's Candy, ranked among the top 50 Hollywood books of all time by the Los Angeles Times. Former reporter and film and television critic for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, Salomon is host of a monthly podcast series called At Lunch, sponsored by the American Jewish Historical Society. Her 2019 book, An Innocent Bystander, was widely hailed as the definitive account of the Achille Lauro hijacking and its aftermath. Quote, "This moving story stands as the most in-depth look at the hijacking to date," wrote Publishers Weekly at the time. Salomon reinforces her place as one of today's foremost chroniclers of American politics and culture. And now, my colleague Rachel Greenspan. Rachel is ADL's Associate General Counsel. As part of the national litigation team at ADL, she focuses on using the law to hold people and entities accountable for engaging in anti-Semitism, extremism, or hate, as well as helping to provide justice for individuals who have been targeted by hate. She also served as Associate Regional Director of the New York, New Jersey Regional Office and Director of Law Enforcement Policy and Civil Rights for ADL's National Law Enforcement Team. Prior to joining ADL, Rachel worked as an agency attorney for the NYPD and an assistant district attorney in the Special Victims Bureau at the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. She holds a BA from Syracuse University and a JD from Touro Law School. And with no further ado, Julie.
Thank you.
On to you.
Thank you so much. So it's very appropriate to be sitting here on this stage because 10 years ago, I attended a commemoration of the Achille Lauro hijacking. And that evening, Lisa and Ilsa, who had donated their family papers here, told their story. I knew Lisa and Ilsa from the synagogue we all belonged to here in the village. Lisa's husband, Jerry, and I were co-presidents there today, together. And I knew about the Achille Lauro tragedy, but it had happened 30 years before. It seemed like ancient history until that night. I attended the event out of respect for Lisa and Ilsa, but after they took the stage and told in incredible detail about what had happened to their family, I was mesmerized. And they brought with them other speakers. It was an incredible night. They had the New York Times reporter here who had put them in the spotlight 3 decades earlier, providing the human interest angle of an ordinary family that were withstanding a horrific event in real time. And other speakers included a former Navy pilot who had taken part in a daredevil chase to capture the hijackers, literally in midair. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. It seemed like something from an action film. And Leon Klinghoffer's grandsons were then. They were both then in their 20s. And then one of them recently joined the U.S. Department of Justice, sort of a fitting coda to what had happened to his grandfather. It was riveting. And that night I turned to my husband, who was sitting next to me, and said, somebody should write a book about this if they hadn't. And that's when I decided to write the book that became An Innocent Bystander. It was a great story, but it was also personal to me. I'm the daughter of Holocaust survivors, and I'm a New Yorker now who lives a mile from Ground Zero. So the subject of hatred and irrational violence and how to create an ethical response is part of my DNA. Where is the line between justice and revenge? How do we manage to never forget without becoming stuck in the past? A surefire recipe for inflicting fresh wounds in the future. At the core of my story was Leon Klinghoffer's murder by a Palestinian hijacker on October 8, 1985, during a Mediterranean cruise on Italian luxury liner, the Achille Lauro. At that time, it was an impossible story to avoid, especially in the United States. Even though acts of terrorism had happened with frightening regularity in Europe, there were plane hijackings and bombs going off all the time in the 1960s, and certainly in the Middle East, as we all know too well, for much longer than that. Terrorism seemed part of a numbing routine, but it also seemed like something that happened over there. Americans had, in some senses, seemed immune from from terrorism, even though they heard the news about it. And in the Middle East, just a couple of years before the Achille Lauro hijacking, 320 US Marines were killed in Beirut in a terrorist attack. But Leon Klinghoffer was different. He wasn't in the military, he was a civilian, he was on vacation in a celebration with his wife and his friends. He was 69 years old and he was disabled. And his life ended on the upper deck of this luxury liner. He was shot by one of 4 young men who had overtaken the ship the day before. And then they threw his body in the wheelchair into the ocean, the sea. So that moment, that murder was a catalytic moment that changed the way many in the US and the world viewed terrorism and its consequences. It became personal. These 2 young women and their beautiful families and their mother, Marilyn, were compelling spokespeople for humanity, actually. They wanted the world to know what happened, and they became compelling advocates. At the time, Jay Fisher, who was a lawyer and a family friend, said 320 Marines were killed in Beirut, but you don't know their names. It was a collective group. Leon was one individual. Leon was every man, and his family became every family. The killing of someone as defenseless as Leon Klinghoffer brought home the randomness of terror. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. For many people, certainly Americans, his murder represented an outright rejection of humanity, an unthinkable targeting of a most vulnerable individual. But what else did it represent? The Achille Lauro hijacking was a critical part of what has become known as the first war on terrorism. That first war entailed the US government's response to the bombings, assassinations, kidnappings, and hijackings that were all too commonplace around the world in the 1980s. Leon Klinghoffer's murder led to the fall of an Italian government. It disrupted peace talks between Israel and the PLO and became an excuse for hawks in the Reagan administration to push through a more aggressive military strategy in the Middle East. The murder of one person can have enormous consequences. The ripple effects were huge. In subsequent years and decades, the Achille Lauro hijacking resurfaced in academic studies, anti-terrorism conferences, congressional hearings, as Ilse and Lisa pointed out, and lawsuits, both criminal and civil, in Italy and in the United States. It was invoked at the trial of Mansour al-Qassar, which you remember very well, who was an international arms dealer who was connected to Leon Klinghoffer's death, to Iran-Contra, and to the South American drug trade. Terrorism is complicated. Klinghoffer, the man, became an enduring symbol, and it's been incredible to watch the way Lisa and Ilse have kept his memory alive. And tragically, the events of the Achille Lauro certainly did not end terrorism or curtail it, and Americans have become all too familiar with the fear and hatred it creates. Clearly, the conflict in the Middle East did not get resolved in the wake of the Achille Lauro, and political violence has become a way of life here in the United States. As you will hear from my fellow panelists, Leon Klinghoffer's murder resonates even today in how we think about terrorism and how we prosecute it through the criminal justice system as well as civil courts. How do we keep safe from terrorism on the one hand while believing or wanting to believe that civilized society requires due process and ethical behavior? In the course of my research, which is the story in the book, but not really for tonight, but just to let you know that I did stumble across the family of Abu al-Abbas, who was the mastermind of the hijacking. And that took me down another road of seeing how these hatreds that have run so deep in the Middle East have had such devastating consequences for so many people. you can't really understand terrorism if you don't look at the panoptic view at what's going on in all these different corners of the world and in corners of people's psyche. And you can't disentangle the political from the personal, because grave decisions of life and death consequence are made by individuals governed by their own histories and passions, no matter where they sit in the chain of power. And what I found in investigating this story, that what began as a distinctly American narrative became an international story involving the interlocking fates of people from many places connected by a single devastating explosive act. And my final thought for now is it's been humbling to watch Lisa and Ilsa's fierce preservation of their father and their mother's legacy. They've dedicated themselves to educating people about terrorism and the hatred that leads to it. Their love for one another, which is so palpable, and to their family is inspirational. And to me, it's a reminder of the best kind of human resilience. It was an honor to be able to tell their story and to be their friend.
Hi, everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about what ADL is doing from a civil litigation perspective. We talk about, prevention versus responsiveness. A lot of the work, right, that is done on the criminal side happens in the aftermath or to try to prevent something from happening. And the work that ADL has now been focusing on from a civil legal perspective is really a newer effort for the ADL, though we've been working, of course, with the Klinghoffers for quite some time in a lot of ways, right? From a policy perspective, legislation, training law enforcement to try to ensure that they are deeply understanding how to spot these threats to begin with. What we have seen now is a newer need for our work to utilize the legal system from a civil perspective to hold bad actors accountable. We talk about justice. We talk about accountability. And none of you in this room need to really know again, right, that there is an unbelievable increase in anti-Semitism right now. And it is permeating every area of people's lives, unfortunately. And so what we have been focusing on now in the wake of the heinous attack on October 7th is how can we hold individuals accountable within the legal system? How can we ensure that we achieve justice, and that justice may look different depending on what we are trying to address? But how do we also ensure that there's accountability? And like Rob said, to not only stop people from doing this again, holding terrorist groups accountable, and also ensuring that everyone knows who did what. In the wake of a moment right now where people like to play around with facts and not necessarily tell the whole truth when they should be telling the truth, there is still one place where the facts matter, and that is in a court of law. And it is our responsibility as lawyers who represent victims of terror, who represent families who have suffered the most unimaginable losses, to go into courtrooms and to utilize the evidence and the legal parameters to put those facts on the record. Because those facts matter to a judge, to a jury, and that record is clear, and that allows everybody to understand who is responsible for these terrorist attacks, whether that's funding, whether that's planning, whether that is actually carrying them out. And so what we've tried to do from our perspective as an organization that is laser focused, right, on fighting anti-Semitism wherever that comes up, we have had this opportunity to partner with co-counsel on several cases with the law firm of Crowell and Mooring to represent, in this moment, to a large group of victims from the attack on October 7th. And that would not have been possible without the Klinghoffers helping to get the ATA passed. That is the legal foundation by which we are able to go into court and prove our case. And that really blazes the path for us. And I know that that is an unimaginable long road, right, that you have all endeavored to focus on, not only for your family, not only for the memory of your father, but really for the good of the Jewish community and everybody, right? Because the goal is to stop this from happening. And, you know, we're realistic. We can't stop everything from happening. Bad things happen, and that's why we have Rob. But the opportunity presents us with a moment to stand with victims, to support them. And, you know, we do that in a variety of ways at ADL. And this is our new opportunity to be able to utilize the legal system to hold people accountable, to hold groups accountable. And that's why we have been able to file 2 lawsuits, not only against Hamas and Hezbollah and several other terrorist groups and organizations, to establish and show that they planned, coordinated, prepared, and carried out October 7th. But our other opportunity is to utilize statutes to hold nation states accountable for their material support. When we talk about Iran, we talk about the nation states. We've also been able to bring a lawsuit against Iran, against North Korea, against Syria, to show the world again that record, that they provided material support, that it wasn't only the terrorist groups going out to create this chaotic and terrible series of attacks, but that they had help. They had help from these countries, and this is the way that we are able to then set that record in front of everybody so they will not forget, and they will know what happened and who's behind it. And, you know, I'm thinking of the words that you just spoke with your mother saying, we have work to do. We have work to do, and we're doing it. And we will have a lot more work to do. And this is the way that we can utilize the legal system to help provide this support, because I can't unring a bell and we can't stop, you know, the suffering, but we can at least try to seek some redress and to prove to the world that this is what happened, and these statutes would not have been able to be utilized but for the great work that you all have been doing. So I am grateful to be in this room with you all today. As Steve said, boy, do I wish it was under different circumstances that we all have met. But I'm very grateful for the work that you all have done. It lays the path for us to continue and to carry on. And we will continue to do that at ADL as we move forward to address the changing landscape, unfortunately, of anti-Semitism as it continues to move on, and use the legal system to be able to hold people accountable.
Thank you. That was terrific from all of you. I think that you have cards when you came in. If you have questions now, it's a good time to write them down, and we have time for a few questions. While we're doing that, I'm going to ask the panelists a question myself. I'm going to change what I was originally thinking to ask because you kind of already covered it. I was going to ask what gives you cause for concern and what gives you cause for hope now. Cause for hope, what gives me hope is listening to you talk about what we're doing and what you're doing. But I'm going to ask a different question, which is, we talk about the Achille Lauro for a lot of people as a wake-up call. Nobody really understood until that happened the potential devastating impact of terrorism in this country on Americans, on innocent bystanders. So do we need another wake-up call? Have we gotten too sort of numb, and is it too much of a normal kind of a routine thing now between terrorist attacks, mass shootings, and so forth, that we don't have the same energy as a society, we don't have the same passion that we had in the aftermath of the Achille Lauro, where everybody knew who Leon Klinghoffer was? And if that's true, what, if anything, can we do to sort of get back the sort of that impetus to really prioritize this as an issue? And I'd like any or all of you to share any thoughts on that.
I'll jump in. I mean, I feel like the big difference between now and then was the forms of communication. I mean, at that time, what made Lisa and Ilsa and initially their mom able to be such powerful spokespeople for this was because media was concentrated. It wasn't just this ongoing rush of information. And I think that's the challenge today is, we're inundated by domestic terrorism, by school shootings, by this, so much information comes in. How do we sort through it? And I think that is the challenge for all of us, and certainly for teaching our children and grandchildren, is how to not allow all that information just become a blur, and not to put in a sales pitch for the American Jewish Historical Society, but I do believe that this individual stories, the more we hear them, I think with all the survivors of Lockerbie, I know there are people in this room who have worked with survivor stories, are really important, because I do think it's easy to close your eyes to something that is a group of people, but when it's an individual, it's really important, and we have to open our hearts up to it. But it's tough because of the massive quantity of information we get.
That we're going to have a reception out in the Great Hall after this, and you'll have a chance out there, if you have not gotten your question answered, hopefully to come talk to whoever you want to talk to try and have a private conversation about it, or a conversation as private as it can be in that setting. Julie, a question for you, and it's about, I'm going to paraphrase the question a little bit because it's long. The way you describe the terrorists in your book, more than just their murderers, you sort of tell their story as people and individuals with their own motivations and so forth. And the question really is that something that, more broadly, there should be some concern, people should be concerned about giving them that human face as opposed to just making this these are the bad guys and these are the good guys kind of a story?
I think by talking about good guys and bad guys only, then I don't think we progress as a society. It doesn't, to find out what motivates people, to find out what leads people to do something, doesn't mean that you condone the actions that came from it. You don't say, well, you get a free pass now. But I think if you don't understand the political, the societal, the geopolitical reasons for what happens, then I think we never move forward, because there are no good guys and bad guys. There are, within every country, within every group of people, there are good guys and bad guys. And so unless we just want to keep rewinding the same tape over and over and over again, I feel you have to look at root causes and try to address those, or we just will keep repeating the same history over and over again.
I'm going to direct the last question to you, Rachel, and that is about collecting monetary damages in these cases. And have there been any legal successes? What are the expected outcomes? And if the answer is we're not likely to get to see any money,
Right.
then why spend all the time and energy going after these governments and these terrorists?
Sure, it's a good question. Certainly when you ask for certain types of damages, right, you're going to ask for monetary because of the fact that, well, for a variety of reasons, but more importantly, I think there are several reasons why you would bring this type of a lawsuit. But when we think about the challenges of recovering from a monetary perspective, there's kind of, I think, two buckets. And I think it's important to understand that there are ways that the American government has set up an ability for victims of terror to recover financial damages when certain types of lawsuits are brought against individual countries who are alleged to have provided material support for these types of terrorist attacks. So when we talk about the potential for recovery of monetary damages, for those types of lawsuits, there is a higher potential for individuals who have been harmed to recover from the Victims' Compensation Fund that is funded with monetary assets, essentially, that are seized in a variety of ways from businesses that are caught essentially doing business illegally with certain nation states that are on this list of essentially it's illegal to do business with. So there is a potential in certain lawsuits when you bring them against these nation states to essentially establish a path for potential recovery. You still have to prove your case in a court, and the judge still has to find in your favor. But if that is the case, that pathway is a lot easier to help victims recover from a monetary perspective. Separately, though, when you talk about the challenges from recovering monetary funds or any damages from terrorist groups, that is a bit challenging. There are, of course, much smarter people than me who have written lots of resources about the financial workings of these groups and where that funding leads. And so it is not maybe as likely as if you were to be able to recoup from a government fund, but there is still always the possibility that it could happen. But really, more importantly, these lawsuits are to make a statement, right? They are lawsuits that are to show the public and to show the world that this behavior, these actions are not going to be ignored, and that we are going to ensure that they are shown to be responsible and accountable in a court of law. There are a variety of reasons why people bring lawsuits, and yes, monetary damages are very important, especially if you have been aggrieved in these types of ways, because the path to having some sort of semblance of resources to deal with the fallout of being a victim and having this for the rest of your life does deserve monetary compensation. It absolutely does. But these really are lawsuits for impact. They're here to make a statement and to ensure, like I said, that the record is clear. And if we can recover monetary damages, we will do so, and we will work to try to get that. And so, I think it is a work in progress to kind of see whether that will remain to be seen.
Thank you all very much, and thank you all very much.